Since my husband lost his job, let's talk about disabilities and unemployment. He is not disabled, but I am. And I happen to know that a lot of my family considers what I do being unemployed. So let's have a real chat about disability, its correlation to unemployment, and how disabled people, even when they are employed, are at a disadvantage. This world looks a little different for us than it does for y'all. Okay, first, let's look at the facts. When I first came to this page, it was specifically to look at the highlighted segment. However, this page is full of amazing information. The source is the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. No big deal. If you would like to take a second and read a lot of this, you can, but I'm gonna sum it up for you. Last things first, at the very end of the page, they talk about how they calculate the unemployment rate. I do not agree with how we calculate the unemployment rate, but whatever, it's still helpful. You have to keep in mind that they do not count anybody that is outside of the labor force as unemployed. That is people who are neither employed nor unemployed. I'm gonna read this part. Unemployed people are those who did not have a job, were available for work, and were actively looking for a job in the 4 weeks preceding the survey. So basically, they get to decide that you're not looking for work even if you are, and that's a whole thing. Based off of like how long you've been looking for a job, they decide if you really don't want to have a job. It is le flawed. But at the very end of this page, they make a note. A large portion of people with a disability, about 3/4, were not in the labor force in 2023. 75%. So all the statistics we're about to talk about are only about the 25% of disabled people who are in the workforce. They explain it away by saying that it's because of older people. Older people aren't looking for jobs and they're disabled, so that's the inflation. I'm not so convinced. They do admit at the very end that across the ages, it doesn't matter. So I don't know why they added that little tidbit. People with a disability are less likely to even be in the labor force. So that's the start. Now that you know what numbers we're actually about to be comparing, the unemployment rate for disabled people in the workforce is 7.2%, which is roughly twice that than the non-disabled community. In 2023, people with a disability were less likely to have graduated from a higher education. And there is a direct correlation that they see between education and employment. So the less educated disabled people are, the less employable. People with a disability were more likely to have part-time jobs. Almost 30% of people with a disability work part-time jobs versus 16% of people without. They go on to specify that only 3% of the workers with a disability were working part-time for economic reasons. Most of the time it was because they could not find full-time work. People with disabilities are more likely to work in sales, to work in service industries, and less likely to be management or business professionals. And the thing that is the most obvious and the most funny to me, a larger share of people who are disabled are self-employed. That's me, I'm do that. I like that one. I've always done that. Cause honestly, I just don't like people. That's why being able to use things like this app are so important. It brings business to people like me. It makes employment more accessible. Segue. Did you know that it is legal to pay disabled people less money? Usually, workers must be paid at least the federal minimum wage. Sometimes, however, an employer may pay less than minimum wage to a worker with a disability. Take a second to read the criteria. We're just going to focus on the first one. A worker's pay rate may be less than the minimum wage only if the worker's disability reduces his or her ability to do the job. This was originally, intended to be a kindness to disabled people. Think of the poor child with an intellectual disability who just wants to restock the ketchups and the mustards, and that's all he can do, but he wants to have a job. We should give him this job. But we should be allowed to not really pay him full. And I want to say I see the logic in that. However, I don't believe that any work should exist that is not a livable wage. Minimum wage is currently not enough as it is. We need to think much more deeply than, well, he does X amount of work, so he deserves Y amount of pay. And we need not infantilize people with disabilities to be like, well, they really just need it as like pocket change so they can go do fun things. No, that is a full human being. We are entire human beings. Intellectual, developmental, physical disabilities, it doesn't matter. How are you doing them a favor by not giving them access to a job that would give them health care, for one? How are you doing them a favor by not giving them access to the ability to pay for their own selves? People who have disabilities are more likely to have higher medical bills. What is subsidizing that? I would also like to point out that a lot of times, for absolutely no reason, they will put requirements in job titles that make no sense. Actually, it's not for no reason. It's just to be ableist. Why should a project manager for a team that just works virtually have to lift up to a certain amount of weight? Why is that on the job requirement list? I've seen it be used to say, well, you can't do that, so we don't have to pay you the full amount. How is that really a part of the job? What? And since disabled people are already at a disadvantage and don't have a lot of money because their people won't pay them any, how are we supposed to afford litigation for this? The system is rigged. And if you think that people aren't abusing this, they are. And I don't think that any work exists that should be less than a living wage. And that includes for disabled people. Come at me, bro. Apparently California is like on my page now. There is a debate in California's disability community about the opportunity for everyone with a disability to be able to find a job in the broader labor market and whether this should be the goal. While some people with disabilities appreciate the steady task, guaranteed hours, and company of coworkers, the opponents argue that it segregates individuals with disabilities, preventing them from obtaining better paying positions. Thank you for bearing through that with me. But as you can see, this is clearly a debated topic. And I agree with California. I'm a Californian. I agree with this. That law has only led to segregation and people living inequitable lives. So, disabled people are employed less, and disabled people are paid less. When they do work, they are more likely to have lower jobs, right? I'm not going to go on a rant about disability pay. I want to go on a rant about disability pay, but that's going to be a whole other video. But I will say that when the options are struggle and fight every single day to have just a little bit more and still not enough to live, or get disability checks that don't pay for your life, aren't enough for you to live, but allow you to be sick and have health insurance, what are you going to choose? Is it even really a choice? And then if you are on disability, you can't work at all. You can't save any money. You can't own anything. So if you're a person who has ever looked at a disabled person who was unemployed and been upset or frustrated with them, take a step back. Remember that it's not their fault. I don't know how to end this video because that felt really depressing. And it explains why I've always had to be self-employed. It's because I can always accommodate myself. And I can still get the job done. Whereas with employers, they're not willing to accommodate me, and then are wondering why I can't get the work done, or why I get burnt out.